Welcome to Aleatory Encounters, a Steiner Books podcast. What you are about to listen to is an audio snapshot of an in-person human conversation that took place here at our offices in Spencertown, New York. In this episode with Signe Schaefer. What have you brought me today, Signe?
I have brought you this new book, Elderflowering, Lived Experiences of Growing Older, which is a collection of essays written by people in the biography world, and there are 19 of them, and I'm co-editing it with my friend Karen Gerlach, and it's been done very quickly because it's about aging, and the authors are not young. Everyone had to be over 70. So we decided we need to get it out soon. Editing turned out to be more than I imagined.
So it came about quite quickly.
It has. You know, the biography and social art world has been growing in this country, and people are interested, and there's almost nothing in English after 63. Now, Rudolf Steiner died, so he didn't talk too much about after 63 either. And there have been a few people over the years who have had interesting ideas. Bernardine Jocelyn and George and Gisela O'Neill. But many of the people in this work now are older. And I knew that we all talk about it and think about it and share ideas periodically. And I had really no intention to do another book, as I think I had already told you. But I woke up one morning, I could edit a book. And I thought of my friend Karen and called her up, and she said, yeah, let's do it. And editing is at least as hard as writing. But I didn't really know that. So we put out a call and asked for proposals and got a lot. And then we said, okay, send us something in 2 months. And people did.
Wow.
Pretty much. A few were a little bit longer, but not too much.
That's actually quite impressive to have 19 follow-throughs like that. Tell me why editing is at least as hard as writing.
With writing, I'm always surprised how it has a life of its own. And if I get out of the way and I'm really attentive, then it's fascinating to see what I end up writing. Often somewhat different than what I expected. This doorway opens suddenly and I go with it. And with editing, so you receive something from others. And in the case of this book, I needed to really keep adjusting my imagination of what it might be. And in a way, the pieces are remarkably personal. They're honest. They're not exactly memoir, but more in that direction than I had imagined, although we definitely wanted the book to be based on experiences and real experience of the questions that we live with as older people and how our working with anthroposophy or other ideas have played in on that. It's difficult to cut someone's life if that's what they're telling you. And yet, there were times when I felt we didn't need quite so many details about early life, middle life. We needed always some if there was going to be an echo in what would come later in people's lives. But so how to do that was something I hadn't really imagined.
Oh, that sounds like a beautiful challenge, though.
I have to say the writers were amazingly open to questions or suggestions, and I really admire them for that.
I'm just thinking of the world at large and possible future listeners. You've referred to biography. It is the writing of a life, the writing of one's life. But out of Steiner's work, there is a nuanced approach to something that is called biography, but is maybe not quite the same way we think of the word. When you said there's nothing in English after 63, you meant there's nothing in English pertaining to anthroposophical biographical study after the age of 63.
Yeah, biography is the term that has taken hold of the work that people have been doing out of their interest in human development and what Rudolf Steiner has had to contribute to that field in many different areas. Perhaps it could have been a different name, but that's the one that came along, I would say, in the late 70s. Certainly, people began to talk about biography workshops and so on. So the name has continued. In general, it refers to looking at the human being from a variety of different perspectives, life phases being one of the big ones, 7-year phases usually. And Rudolf Steiner spoke about the background for looking at those 7-year phases up to 63. Otherwise, in biography work, people also look at temperament, they look at gender, they look at relationships, they look at karma. It's different. It's a movement now around the world, and people for the last 25 years anyway have had an increasing relationship with each other in different countries. In this country, we tend to refer to it as biography and social art. And of course, it's about bringing ideas to how a person can understand their own life story more, how they can find perhaps meaning and acceptance and an understanding of their lives. But I have to say for myself, over the years and years, I've also come to feel that it is a practice in being interested in others, which nowadays I think is more important than ever, that we actually share a question. What happened when you were 21? You tell me something about yourself, and I am interested. I try to tell you something about myself, and I find threads I hadn't noticed before, maybe. But I also hear in your story things that will spark new thoughts in me. But I feel that the small group work we do is ever more important, really, as a practice and interest, when it's so easy to kind of pull away from people now and just know them online or know them through social media or whatever.
Is that even a knowing?
I mean, I come from a generation before all of that. My granddaughter asked me a really interesting question when she was visiting recently. She's 16, and she said, "Ami, when you were young and you didn't have a phone, what did you do when you felt awkward in a group?" I said, "I tried to talk to people." But I'm sure you have observed how people go immediately into their little world. I'm really glad that she realizes there's a question there.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, however, we can encourage people to be interested in each other, to reflect on themselves, to meet in person, we're doing a service. And the biography work, for sure, does that.
I was fascinated when I first heard about this idea of that there was such a thing as biography work. It seemed like such a practical and obvious result of, you could just call it anthroposophy in a way. It's just where you're trying to understand the human life. It's called karma research in a way that's completely egalitarian, right? I mean, I think that's the other sort of unspoken aspect of when you're describing it, is that it only demonstrates the archetypal equality of everyone.
Everyone has a biography. And you spoke about that writing of a life. From a certain perspective, you could say, when did that story begin? And it probably began before we were even here. You can say, imagine you wanted to become the person you are. If you were sort of packing to come to Earth, what did you put in your bag? Not to be some ideal person, but to be the person who's here right now, so far. And of course, you would have put in some people, and you would have put in maybe a place, but maybe you put in an abusive parent, because you wouldn't be sitting in this place now if that hadn't been in your biography. Maybe you put in a sailboat because that was so important for you. Who knows? There's no right or wrong. It's back to your egalitarian picture. It's only, what did you need to become you? And we all have some hard things, and we all have gifts. I for sure needed a sense of humor.
Did you have it, or did you need to find it?
No, I had it. But I didn't know that's what it was until I got older. Yeah, I had it. So it's interesting just to reflect for a bit. And then that idea, I think, can help us take more ownership of our lives, come away from being victims. There's a lot in our modern world that encourages people to be victims. And please, many people have been victimized by horrendous things. So that's a bigger subject. But in trying to understand our own lives, how do we find the tools to see the meaning, to take up the responsibility, to go forward with openness and interest?
I'd like to set that against what you were saying about the younger generation diving into the screen or the phone in an awkward situation. How is this wanting to know more about oneself not egoism? Where's the balance of egoism and social ability?
Where, I don't know, but it seems clear to me that the younger generations have put this technology in their bags when they came to Earth. And sometimes I look at the world and I can be very sad about how it's going. And then I meet a new baby and I just say, thank you for coming. Because I have to trust that the young also are bringing capacities that I don't have and that my generation doesn't have. And we had other things. But how are they able to let those gifts unfold? That is certainly a question that I think should concern everyone, that the technology doesn't overtake the process of becoming human. But that this is part of their world is clear. and that they will have to find their own relationship is also clear.
Mm-hmm.
And how they do that is an enormous question, which I don't have an answer for. But I have loved Waldorf education for decades because it works to serve the gradual development of the child and to honor their childhood and to let teaching be face-to-face and learning be experiential and in community with classmates and so on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of wonderful young people in the world, and I salute them for finding their way. I don't know how they're doing it, but good for them.
Mm-hmm. Yes, well, we may one day be their children.
Oh, well, that's an interesting question. Yeah.
From the perspective of Earth, anyway.
Yeah. It's interesting to think about the changes in 100 years. I mean, we focus on our now and all the things that have happened, but I'm old enough now that I can actually see a century. And it's just staggering, the things that didn't exist when I was in high school that exist now for high school students. But maybe people 100 years before I was in high school, girls were probably often not going to school at all. So there were also changes.
It's an ongoing question, I think, in any responsible person's consciousness to step back and, to look at time in terms of centuries, and then hopefully to do what we can towards not only the survival but the triumph of humanity. And so part of what is happening today, it would seem to me, is that is being diverted. And so that, to me, is also part of the meaning of the biography work, because it contributes to a recognition of the dignity and the wonder of humanity, which in some places and in some circles, also driven by technology, is being plowed asunder or ignored. Miracles are ignored. The wonder of the stages of life is ignored. The sacredness of childhood.
The threats are enormous, and the stakes are high, and we have work to do as human beings. And within all of that, there are ideas that suddenly also come and can fire us. We have to be able to live with paradox now. We have to come away from either or, right, wrong, this, that, to being able to hold a bigger picture that can allow apparent contradiction to be explored and worked with. The idea that is coming everywhere now, and it's very exciting to me, of the interconnectedness of things. That's coming in science. The trees are in communication with each other. It's coming in so many different ways. And of course, the internet has connected people. It's a technological expression of the fact that we are all interconnected. And for me, the question is, where does the technology buy off too quickly an emerging idea, perhaps? And whether that's the development of the imagination with ready-made pictures, or this sense that we are interwoven with people around the world, with people who are no longer alive, with the different kingdoms of nature, with the spiritual world. sounds so grand, but more and more people are beginning to see different aspects of that picture of interconnection. And that may save us a little longer, help us along anyway. As unique as every life is, and in the biography work, it has to be so clear. It's not about templates that we fulfill, but there are universal laws at work of development, of rhythm, and so on. And then always the question, how is this in each individual's life? I remember when I was much younger and first hearing about, for example, life phases, my whole world just opened up with, oh, that's what happened. That happened to me. Yeah. But it's not like it happens this way for every person, but can we recognize there was a threshold I moved through? It was like that with anthroposophy for me. Suddenly there were names for experiences I had that were nameless, but that I knew. That was very exciting.
So you said that you encountered this concept of the life phases when you were somewhat young. I remember when I first took a course in biography in Austin, Texas with Leah Walker when I was maybe around 30. And she was like, oh, you're so young, this doesn't... And I was like, I am? No. 18 years later, and then anticipating your moon nodes.
I think there's danger in wanting to anticipate. Like you're waiting for something in some pre-imagined way. And it will more likely come to you around a corner. And then one day you go, oh, of course. I wasn't expecting you that way, but here you are.
Where's the danger then?
That you can just waste yourself expecting something to happen this way. No, it's not really a big danger. I just think that it's not the point somehow of trying to see that life has basic rhythms, that we have our own individuality, that we've come with karmic intentions. What are we doing with them? How is that endowment playing out? Or what am I building for the future? All of those questions are part of the stew, in a way, of a life. So I wouldn't want to have ideas preempt experience. But on the other hand, for example, around 28, most people do go through some kind of a inner turmoil, crisis, change, opening up, ending. And to hear that that's real and that there's nothing wrong with you because of that, but in fact that it's perfect, that's helpful, I think. And so with other phases, similar things. One of the ideas that comes with this post-63 years is somewhere along the line, people got the idea that Steiner said, although I have never found this, that you're free of your karma after 63. Now, at a basic level, I find that absurd. And it's not hard to realize that for the rest of our lives, we are living the consequences of things that were part of our destiny. But I have come to feel and experience and observe that potentially we can have a freer relationship to the necessities of our life. We can have that when we're younger also. But in those years post 63 and especially post 70, actually, we have the possibility to not be as reactive or as driven by the things that have been part of our whole life. Yeah? The themes and the events and so on. It's not a given. It's always based on our own ongoing development and work and attention to development. What's interesting is when he says the things that you meet in those post-63 years, some of them, may be quite new, and they may be coming more from the future than the past. That's an interesting thing to ponder when, for example, I found myself in China in my middle 60s. I never even wanted to go to China. It wasn't a possibility to consider in my youth. But there I was. Where's that coming from? And of course I'm not saying, oh, well, that means I'll be Chinese in my next life. Clearly not. Maybe I will be, but that's clearly not what it means. But it was interesting for me to ponder experiences I had there that were quite new, and to wonder where that might lead.
Mm-hmm.
For example, being the only Caucasian person that I saw in a town where I worked for about 10 days until I saw one German man in a store. And therefore being stared at and photographed endlessly. I don't think biography work is prescriptive. It's not that it doesn't suggest opportunities that may open up, but it's not about preordaining our own life and development. There are challenges that will present themselves all through life in ways that we can think about vis-a-vis others or look back at around ourselves. But how things will play out is so individual.
And there's a lot of threads being woven in this too. I mean, even
All
to
the
just
time.
look at one rhythm, one 7-year rhythm or 12-year rhythm or 18-year, 9-month rhythm, it's all weaving together, and it is the life in the threads that are interwoven that are coming from the past that are going towards the future.
Makes life interesting.
But maybe just one more thing about this post-63 picture. There is this sort of picture, you're done with your karma.
The one thing that I think is true that Steiner says is that we have met the basic intentions that we came into this life with. But they're not done. So that's where this idea that you're suddenly free of your karma makes no sense. But that the things that you came with, you've encountered.
You alluded to something about a freeness in the relationship to...
It's not a given, but I think many people do experience that they can have a different relationship to some of the things that have been driving forces in their life.
And does that have anything to do with the wisdom of old age?
I think that's probably a major part of it, even. That you are less bound. by the material world, the events of your life, and so on. Potentially. Potentially. You can look at the hurts differently, not just live in the pain. You can look at the gifts differently. And in my experience, gratitude, with tremendous gratitude, that I don't think I was an ungrateful younger person, but it feels qualitatively deeper now.
Gratitude even for
even the hard things. Yeah. And of course, aging brings lots of other hard things that, the body is slowly contracting in its vital forces, helping us out of it in a certain way. It's part of the process of excarnating. We live in a time where if death is the end, then that's a very frightening thought. If that isn't the imagination one holds, it's a different opening that might happen. That doesn't mean we're not sad when people die, but we miss how we know them on earth. The question is only whether we can be open to something we don't know yet.
I love that. The question is whether we can be open to something we don't know yet.
And that always brings me back to living with questions, not answers. The question is an opening, potentially.
Yeah, withholding judgment.
We have to, because we have to exercise a holding back to keep a field of openness. The little child is just open. They don't have to withhold. They learn.
I mean, I think back to the question, Grandma, what did you do when you were with other people and you felt awkward? And then you pointed to the conversation. This is part of the pedagogical courses for the adolescents, I believe. Steiner is telling the teachers, when we make a judgment, we close a door. We close a door of possibility, really, because how can we, especially in those adolescent years, encounter different worldviews even, and yet you're not yet in the place where I am basing my reality on the acceptance of this and this and this as truth.
It's a piece of the puzzle. It's a piece of reality, every little bit, but to think it's the answer, that's in a way the lie in some schooling and in our world. This is it. Well, I love Steiner's idea of 12 world perspectives, even though I hardly understood the different perspectives that he talked about, but the idea that there are, that was one of those waking up, changing moments, because I know it's true. I used to do an exercise with my students. We had a class we called observation, and I'd put a vase or maybe a pitcher or something like that with a design on one part of it in the center of the room, and they were around in a circle, and they had to draw what they could see. And then put them on the floor, and everyone would walk around, and the obvious question is, which is the right one? And then you know that wars are fought over just that experience and all the different ways of seeing the world that clash. But if you can have an imagination that truth, reality, I don't know what you want to call it, is in the middle, then there's room to imagine there may be some iota of significance in what someone just said, even though it's ridiculous to my way of thinking. But maybe there's something there. Can I at least imagine that? I don't have to embrace it as my view. But I can withhold enough to hold a bigger possibility.
Yeah.
We're all in it together. How do we really come to know that?
Yeah.
It doesn't mean we should just be all wishy-washy, because we do have our particular angle on reality that matters. It just doesn't have to be so exclusive that it destroys another way of seeing something. But still, there are things that we have come into this life to work on and be with and represent and offer and so on. And
isn't that even the goal, or at least the next step, with our intercourse and commerce with those from the other sides of the circle? Through knowing them, through perceiving them, through listening to them, we also obtain their perspectives.
we do, but we also are willing to share the view we have, because it matters in the totality. Yeah.
The 12 together. You've been listening to Aleatory Encounters, a Steiner Books podcast. You can find more about what we do, what you've just heard, and the books we publish at steinerbooks.org.